Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's Breaking History on Badlands Media. We have been going through many weeks that, as usual, we try our best to keep a bit of a running theme going so that each show is not completely disjointed from what comes before and what comes after, while also tying in some context, some important historical context into the world geopolitical situation that is unfolding, that we're living through in history as it is. So the previous weeks we've been looking at the Turkish, what is Turkey? What is the Ottoman Empire? What is the dynamic shaping that region of the world? We've had Colonel Watkins on, who elucidated us remarkably about the nature of the Nazis, the unreconstructed Nazis that were deployed to manipulate the Middle East and the world more broadly after World War II. But we also talked about the issues of Solomon's Temple reconstruction, the killing of heifers, some weird eschatology that is animating end-time cultists that have a both Christian, Muslim, as well as Zionist Jewish veneer as far as skin suits, as you've called it, Gordon, which I just, ever since you said that, I can't get out of my mind. This is exactly it. It's the skin suit idea. These are not Christians, not Muslims, not Jews, but they are Satanists, and they are acting like these different religious representatives, and they do have an eschatology based upon the idea of fulfilling some end times sacred story that they're really committed to. So today we've got a lot of things going on, and we've got a tense situation with there's been a lot of effort to get a war between Iran and Israel, an effort for regime change that goes back many decades. So far, the Iranians have been very constrained. Their response, after decades of having their leaders, their generals, their scientists assassinated, many acts of terrorism have been done against Iran, and now you had an embassy destroyed by the Israelis, on whatever it was, the 1st of April, killing leading generals, killing people who are not directly at war with Israel. Iran responded by targeting military targets, no civilian casualties. They gave forewarning 72 hours. But despite that, there is still a lot of people who want to burn that whole region on fire. And we know that a lot of this is tied to things that happened 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. So, Gordon, I know that today we're going to talk a little bit about the Crusades and some of the relevance of these dynamics from a millennium ago on the current thinking and the strategic value of our current world. So how would you like to begin today's show?
Yeah, well, that was a great intro, Matt. Good to see you. Good to see everyone in the chat. Yeah, so everything you said about Iran and Israel, absolutely. The first time I appeared on Badlands on camera, that was something that I had thought was coming. That was June of last year. I thought that they were going to try to instigate a war between Iran and Israel, and that's, if you study the tea leaves, it just seemed like that was the most logical way to kick off World War III, because you have the blinding element of religion there, which I think really gets people all like operating outside of logic and operating more in like emotion, and zealotry and belief. And that makes them very easy to manipulate, because, like you said, you have kind of like scripture and prophecy and that sort of thing coming to fruition, or at least ostensibly coming to fruition. But we also have to keep in mind that these Satanists, these people who are trying to bring humanity to its knees, effectively, they know the scriptures too, and they know that we put a lot of faith into the scriptures, that people put faith into the scriptures. And so, don't discount the fact that they could absolutely be manipulating us by trying to orchestrate things that would make us think that certain things are happening or not happening, depending on your view of everything. But yes, right now, I think we have some really interesting things with Iran, where I've been writing for the Badlands News Brief for the past few weeks, which everyone should check out. Feels a lot longer than that, because I've been writing like 3 or 4 takes every day. But that's just because there's so much Middle East stuff happening. But I think there's a lot of like fascinating dynamics occurring here. We've talked before, you mentioned before, and we talked about it on Badlands Daily on Monday with CanCon. But after Soleimani was assassinated by Trump and the Americans, when the Iranians did their counterstrike, did the response, they called Trump first and they like coordinated with him. They're like, hey, we got to do this. We got to do this attack. Just want to give you a heads up. And there was minimal damage. The missiles all landed outside of like an Air Force base or something. And that's kind of odd. It's kind of odd that you would have that kind of coordination. We're seeing that same exact coordination happening here, where you have the Iranians calling everyone. They're calling they're calling Turkey, which we talked about recently with Colonel Tanner Watkins. They're calling the Arabs. They're calling MBS and the Jordanians, the Hashemites in Jordan. They're calling the UAE. And then all of that intel is being relayed back to the West, to the U.S. and to Israel, which surely the Iranians knew that was going to happen. And then messages are being sent back to the Iranians saying, hey, just make sure it's a limited response. Don't escalate things, which, again, very odd if we're talking about like acts of war, that you would have that kind of coordination between the two sides. But that just kind of lends to the idea of theater and that you and I have talked about as it relates to history, but then also some of the more conspiratorial things that we talk about at Badlands with maybe a greater plan with Trump and some of these other sovereign-minded individuals who are against this idea of global collectivism and one world government and unipolar control and Western hegemony and empire building, as we like to call it here. Yeah. So it's very interesting to see what Iran's doing, because as I've talked about on the other shows, we're seeing an inversion now of Iran and Israel, where you have everyone for years has been told that Israel is the reasonable, responsible actor in this conflict, or this would-be conflict, and Iran is kind of like the overzealous, radical, gnawing at the bit just to destroy things. And now that the conflict has actually ostensibly began, or at least seems to be beginning from a narrative standpoint, Israel is the one that's out of control. Israel is the one that's kind of attacking everyone. They're attacking Gaza. They're attacking Syria. They're attacking Iran in Syria. They're attacking Lebanon, Iraq. And then they're also thumbing their nose at the UN, kind of flipping them the bird. Like whenever they're called out for alleged war crimes, they're saying, pound sand. Like, we don't care. Iran, on the other hand, I don't know if you know this, they followed Article 51 of the UN Charter. They contacted the Security Council before their attack. They said, here's what we're going to do. Article 51 of the UN Charter says that every member state is allowed to reciprocate a kinetic response if they're attacked by another member state, as long as they follow this procedure. They got to contact the Security Council. The response has to be proportionate to the attack that was committed against them, which, when you think about October 7th and everything that Israel's done in the aftermath, I would say their response has not been proportionate. It's been certainly much heavier. And then they contacted the UN afterwards and said, hey, we're done. This is it. This officially concludes our kinetic response. So they're being the responsible member of the international community, not trying to escalate tensions, at least ostensibly. And Israel is kind of saying, all right, well, like Biden is telling Israel, like everyone's telling Israel, all right, let's just leave it be. We don't need to continue to like go back and forth. And Israel's saying, no, like we are going to respond and attack him again. And the Arabs, by the way, the Arabs stepped in and defended Israel. They swatted down the missiles, but they also said, you know what, we're not going to have your back. If you're going to attack Iran, we're not joining you. And the U.S. said the same. So very interesting dynamics at play. And I do believe this is all about counterinsurgency and removing this nefarious network from power. But getting into like the discussion with the Crusades, so I texted Matt over the weekend because I was watching Kingdom of Heaven, the director's cut, Badlands Story Hour. Chris Paul and Burning Bright had made that the assignment, and there were so many themes. I had never seen the director's cut. I guess I probably saw the theatrical version 20 years ago when it came out, but I just didn't like the movie. I didn't think it was that good, because it's not. The theatrical version, the director's cut, is like an hour longer, much better. And just a lot of nuance presented, a lot of nuance, like good Muslims, bad Muslims, good Christians, bad Christians, religion versus like spiritual, like true spiritual connection with God, the manipulative, the manipulation that occurs at a secular level and political level when it comes to religion and power institutions. All that's kind of explored. There's even a line from Liam Neeson's character at the beginning of the movie that I think was cut out of the original, where he talks about a vision of a Christian Muslim alliance and a Christian Muslim like cooperative, like after the Crusades are over, and he's like absolutely certain that's going to happen. And so it's just it's a great film. And
yeah,
I'd seen
that a decade ago, and I had no idea that they cut out a whole hour plus, because I was kind of underwhelmed by it myself.
Yes.
And I didn't have positive feelings about the movie in general. So when you wrote to me saying that there was actually an intervention by, what was it, Harvey Weinstein or something?
Harvey Weinstein,
when it actually cut off a whole hour of the film before it was allowed to be made public, that blew my mind. So yeah, I definitely have to watch that. But what was in that hour that was so controversial that they had to remove?
Burning Bright kind of explained the reason they did it. It's like a 3-hour movie. It's 190 minutes, like the full version. So it is a very long movie. And apparently Harvey Weinstein, they contacted Ridley Scott like the month that it was coming out, and basically said, look, this movie's way too long, and it's not like, we need it to be an action movie. We've marketed it as an action movie. We need it to be an like a siege of the kingdom, like siege of a castle siege movie, basically. And so they're like, all right, let's go in and cut out all this boring stuff. They took out an hour. A lot of it was the beginning, when it kind of like explains Liam Neeson's character going back and finding his bastard son, Balian. That is all fictionalized. These are all the characters. Anyone who's seen the movie, all the characters in the film are real people. Like Balian's a real person. Godfrey, who's Liam Neeson. And I have a mirror of my map, so we'll look at this. I might as well just open it now so we can look at this.
Sure.
And I think, the thing I like about movies like this is that even if it's not historically accurate, a lot of it is accurate, by the way, in the movie. There are obvious liberties, like artistic license and liberties they take, but I would argue all history is interpretation. So, you can't completely discount an interpretation of history, even when it's put in a pseudo fictionalized film. But at the end of the day, if the movie inspires like an interest in a period, and then inspires you to go read about the period and learn about it and compare what you learn to what was presented in the film, then I would argue that that's a good thing. Because I think it's always good to promote that kind of interest and curiosity. So I went ahead and just pulled like the actors from the film, and put names to them so everyone knows who we're talking about, except for these two, Sibylla and Balian. So Sibylla was played by Eva Green. She did a great job. Balian was played by Orlando Bloom. But basically you have King Baldwin, you have Saladin, you have Godfrey, you have the guys in blue. These are the Jerusalem Knights. So the Knights of Jerusalem, of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And then the guys who are in white with the red cross, these are the Knights Templar. Right? That's who we're going to talk about today. Really the Knights Templar.
And this is Templar. Which crusade is this? This is the third or the fourth crusade?
This would be the end of, technically, I think it's the end of the first crusade. So we have
okay.
Well, or I'm sorry. This would be the beginning of the third crusade. So the first crusade, and I had this map, so I want to give everyone a really quick overview. I know people appreciate the maps, so I want to give people an overview of like what the crusades were, and then we can kind of get into it, because I know you're going to have a lot of feedback and notes to share as we go through this. So feel free to interrupt me as I'm talking if you have something you want to add.
Sure.
The coloration I'm looking for from you on some of this nuance. So purple, you have the Christian lands. Yellow, you have the Muslim lands, and then the red are the kingdoms that were established by the Crusaders. So in purple, the purple line, that's the first crusade, and that happened from 1096 to 1099. So it was a 3-year crusade, and you can see that they all came almost exclusively from France. You had some coming from the Holy Roman Empire, which would be Germany. The first king of Jerusalem would be this guy, Godfrey. So he actually is from Belgium. But all the characters in the film, like all the people you see here who aren't obviously the Muslims, these people are all French. So like Ash was asking me last night, like what ethnicity or what like nationality would these people be from Europe? All these people for the most part are French. They do show some like Germanic people in the film, but all the leading characters are all ostensibly, from effectively French. And you'll see that a lot of the Crusaders come from France. So this guy becomes king for 1 year. He reluctantly accepts it. And then he dies a year later in the year 1100. And then his youngest brother, Baldwin, becomes king. And the guy in the film, that'd be Baldwin the First. And so the guy in the film is Baldwin the Fourth. And then the son, who is poisoned by her because he has leprosy, that's Baldwin the Fifth. And so King Baldwin was a real person. He was called the Leper King. There's no historical evidence of him like wearing a mask like this, but it is true that at age 16 he defeats Saladin. So let's back up a little bit. First Crusade in 1099, the Christians come in and they sack Jerusalem. They take Jerusalem and they establish this. They establish the kingdoms of Antioch and Edessa up here in the north. They then subsequently come in 50 years later and they run this campaign down here in modern day Syria and Lebanon and establish the kingdoms of Tripoli and Acre. So the film takes place in 1087, or I'm sorry, 1187. So the Third Crusade begins in 1189, so 2 years after the end of the film. But in 1187, in 1181, you have Saladin, and Saladin is this guy from the film, and he's really Salah ad-Din, and that's what they call him in the film. That's actually how you pronounce his name, but the Anglicized version is Saladin. That's what people call him throughout history in the West, is they call him Saladin. So he I think is given a pretty he's given a pretty fair treatment in the film. I think there's a lot of people who watched the film like 20 years ago and thought that this was like some sort of romanticized version of Muslims and, you know, the noble savage trope and all that, because, you know, he doesn't slaughter the whole city at the end after he sacks Jerusalem. He lets them all leave peacefully and walk out, which is exactly what happened. That is true. That Balian did negotiate the peaceful surrender, and the Muslims let the Christians leave Jerusalem in peace. Once he also ruled Jerusalem, he allowed certain Christians to come back and worship in Jerusalem. So, you know, the idea that the Muslims just took Jerusalem and wouldn't allow Christians to come back is not entirely true. There's a lot of gray and a lot of nuance when it comes to this history that is just not presented. One example would be this woman, Tamar of Georgia. And Georgia, you know, is up here in the Caucasus. And so she's Christian. And when she actually had a good relationship with Saladin. And after he took Jerusalem, she petitioned him to get some of the artifacts that had been taken from Georgia by the Crusaders returned to Georgia. And he did return a lot of it to Georgia. So the Georgian Christians were one of the groups that were allowed to come back to Jerusalem to do their pilgrimage, because back then, during this period, this medieval time, it wasn't just Muslims going to like places like Mecca for their pilgrimage. Christians throughout Europe were going to Jerusalem for their pilgrimage. That was considered like a divine act. That's how you could go to Jerusalem and get salvation before you died, so you could get into heaven. So with that said, before we go any further, is there anything you want to add as far as coloration? Because before we start talking about like Templars and everything, or
no, you know what? I'd like to see how we infuse the Templars, because you were saying something very interesting that I really would love to get your take on and your hypothesis about the aspect of why that hour was cut that brings in the element of the Templars, which, for those who don't know, I mean, the Templars is not just it's not just an order that was created 1,000 years ago and that endured for a couple of centuries and then was just shut down for being Baphomet worshippers by a king of France and a certain pope at that time in the 14th century. It wasn't something disconnected from the present age. People should just really be aware that there are, and I mean, if people are watching this program, they're probably already aware that there are agencies above the official narrative of things that involve like modern New Templars. This is what the Round Table movement, which we discussed last week when we were talking about Cecil Rhodes. The organization that was created under him and the funds that he got by raping Africa, which was the Round Table movement, overseen by Lord Milner. Lord Balfour was a major player in this. All of those who orchestrated and created the framework for the Zionist state, who also were supporting the growth of Nazi fascism at the same time from the British High Command. They were modern Templars. That's where the Grail myth of the Templars originated, the story of Arthur and the Round Table. So there's this idea that was there also in the Nazi High Command. Himmler was a member of or a leading figure within the New Templar Order. You have also Knights of Malta, which is going to play into the story of the Crusades quite a bit, which you had, Reinhard Galen was made a Knight of the Order of Malta in 1948 when he was given a new job to set up the German security apparatus under Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles is a member of the Order of Malta, as is Bill Casey, as is every CIA director. So you have these medieval crusading orders that still exist, though sometimes they have a different form. So their role and involvement in this period, this extremely important period of history, is so important for people to hold in mind. And also just to keep in mind, this is what the neoconservative movement was designed with the Zionists at the same time to bring about. Was it a revival of the Crusader ideology under a modern 20th, 21st century veneer in order to usher in a new type of culture that would be conducive to forever wars, which is exactly what that disruptive divide to conquer strategy was that we're talking about here. So I just love to see how you're going to weave this story together.
Yeah, and that's just such a good point, because I think like we weren't sure if we were going to go this direction with like kind of like bookending like story hour and kind of like going along with the history behind it. But then you sent me the Alex Jones tweet of like where he tweeted the picture of Palestine and Israel, and he said, "Oh, like the one state solution," and it was the Templar logo. Yeah, that one. The one
that's
state
Alex
solution.
Jones.
Yeah,
this
of course.
pissed me off when I saw this.
Yeah, so
an interesting idea.
Matt's assuming he was like, "All right, this pisses me off. Like, we're definitely doing this episode now." And I was like, hell yeah, Alex Jones. Like, hell yeah, Alex Jones, you idiot. It's like, you definitely just baited Matt into doing it. I think Alex Jones did that just because he knew that Matt was going to want to do this episode now. But that's exactly right. Sure. That's the entire mentality of like the neoconservative and the stuff I talk about with the Western Goals Foundation and like the Fourth Great Awakening, which I do think was kind of a CIA psyop. It was to get evangelicals and Protestants in the West angry and like vengeful towards the Middle East, like towards Muslims in the Middle East, and saying, we got to go take back what's ours, which is exactly what happened with the Crusaders. Now they convince people to, become knights and go fight for the Holy Land. I see Lukester in the chat saying that Saladin charged 10 dinar for the Franks, for like if you were Frankish meaning like you're from the French area, like France basically. There were some Franks in Germany as well, but if you were a Frank, you had to pay 10 dinar to come to enter Jerusalem and worship. That's true. He always had I think he maintained like an animosity towards the Franks throughout his life. He even, I think, speculated about invading Europe. He's like, I should just leave now that I've conquered the Holy Land. I should just carve it up to all like my lieutenants, leave a will so everyone knows what my will is, get on a ship and sail to Europe to go conquer the Franks. Just because I think he had that sort of animosity. But again, it goes back to the fact that the first crusade was launched by the Franks. So I think that's part of it. But all the other Christians, like, he allowed to come in without paying the 10 dinar. So, and that's something that happened in Jerusalem throughout Jerusalem's history, where like the Muslims controlled it and they would charge a tax for non-Muslims. Christians controlled it. They would charge a tax for Muslims. That's just, like the back and forth. But getting back to this, all right, so let's talk about just a little bit like the history, like the surface level history. So Saladin, you have the Ayyubid empire. So that would be the yellow that's shown right here. So prior to the Ayyubids, so the Ayyubids that was Saladin, that was the empire he helped establish. Before that, you had the Fatimid, I think I'm saying that right, Fatimid Caliphate. And so the Fatimid Caliphate was based out of Egypt. Saladin was a Kurd, so he comes from up here. So we talked about Kurdistan, like the area that kind of straddles Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, like that region. That's where Saladin came from. So he's coming down from up here. You have the Fatimid Empire operating out of Egypt. You can see how from the 10th century to the 12th century it grows and reaches all the way to the western reaches of North Africa, all the way down to the Hijaz, Mecca, and Medina. And then it shrinks back again just in time for Saladin to come in and kind of take over and conquer it. So Saladin ends up conquering all of this: North Africa, Egypt, the Hijaz Empire, all the way down, which is the Hashemites, all the way down to modern day Yemen. You have the Holy Land. He occupies Jerusalem for a while. A significant thing that he did is he was the first person to call himself the holy custodian of the custodian of the two holy sites of Islam, which would be Mecca and Medina down here. That is a title that was maintained until the Ottomans took over in the 16th century, in the 1500s. They then kind of assumed that role, and it was name escapes me, but it was one of the Ottoman emperor sultans was the one who I think eventually readopted that title and started using it again. And then now the Saudis certainly use that. So ever since the Saudis established Saudi Arabia, they certainly call themselves the holy custodian of the two holy sites or whatever. So just an interesting thing that we have an official title. It's considered like the highest title in Islam. That's like the Pope basically of Islam, is like the custodian of the two holy sites. That title was created by Saladin. And a big part of that was because he took over both Egypt and Hijaz, as well as the Levant areas up here. So as far as the specific history between Saladin and Baldwin, you have Baldwin is the leper king. At 16, he defeats Saladin, and they have a 6-year peace. And Baldwin finds out after that battle that he has leprosy, and that he, leprosy, for those who don't know, is a terrible affliction where basically I think your flesh like rots and you end up dying at a very young age. And I think he dies in his 20s. But I think he has a lot of benevolence and wisdom that he acquires, probably because he's facing his own impending doom and death. And there's like a nobility to him, like a real nobility to him, where he's respected by Saladin. And that I think is accurately portrayed in the film. He's respected by everybody. He's revered because he is a benevolent king. And then you have, this guy over here, Guy de Lucien. I can't say his name right, but I'm just going to call him Guy
de Lusignan.
Yeah, Guy de Lusignan. So he's a Templar as far as well as Renaud. Like where the film takes liberties is like Sibylla. They present like this hatred between Sibylla and Guy because they're married, and like the reality is that she was actually very loyal to him. They present kind of this romance between Balian and Sibylla. That's not true. So there is fiction there, but I think that's just more like movie making than actually like altering history. Raymond of Tripoli, so he's like the sovereign of Tripoli. He's brought in by Baldwin to be the bailiff, even though there's some tumultuous tension between those two. Baldwin doesn't really trust Guy, and he knows that when he dies, that Guy and Renaud and the Templars are really going to try to take over Jerusalem. So he brings in Raymond to kind of be the bailiff and be kind of the steward until his nephew comes of age and can be king. And so you see this dynamic in the film between the Knights of Jerusalem and the Templars, where Baldwin, like I think the very first scene when the film takes us to Jerusalem, you see them hanging Templars, and they explain that they're hanging these guys because they had broken the truce between Saladin and Baldwin and attacked Muslim caravans. And then you see later in the film, it shows the Templars attacking a Muslim caravan. And as a direct result of that, Saladin raises his army and marches on Karak. Karak would be right here in modern day Jordan, just east of the Dead Sea, and then they march on Jerusalem after that. So you can see how the Templars, like in the film, they're kind of playing the role in the modern framing. They're playing the role of like the proxy group that's going to do the false flag attack in order to provoke a war and start a greater war. And so it sounds like I'd have to go back and watch the actual version to understand the exact scenes that were cut out. But from what I can tell, what was cut out was this nuance between the Jerusalem Knights and the Templars, where they left all the scenes of the Templars like doing all this really nefarious stuff, but they didn't really show that there was this contrast between them and like the good Christians. And so if you saw like a lot of these critics 20 years ago were angry because they were like, the film portrays the Muslims as being purely good and the Christians as kind of being these like barbarians. And that's not really what the film was showing. That's what Harvey Weinstein's version was. Harvey Weinstein's version was the Christians are all bad. They're the evil ones. The Muslims are the good ones. I think that was intentional because I think he was trying to provoke. I think his interests were to provoke hatred between the East and the West, provoke hatred between Christians and America, Christian Americans and like towards Islam and towards the Middle East. And so I think a lot of that nuance was lost. There was also like a lot of stuff about the characters that was cut out that made the film like way better. But yeah, that was a big part of it that was cut out, was I think that nuance of showing that it was the Templars that were a subgroup of these Christian Crusaders that were really causing these problems. This guy, by the way, I don't think he's ever actually named. He's credited as the Hospitalier. So like the Knights Hospitaliers. That's like I believe the Knights of Malta, like you were saying. They're like another group separate from the Templars. So you had a lot of these orders. These you could really think of them kind of as like mercenary groups. But that's what you had operating in the Crusades. You had these groups that were international groups that weren't. It's not like you had the nation of France, the nation of England, nation of whatever. You had these kind of NGOs, so to speak, like of their day. That's where the Knights came from, and these orders were financed by a lot of times by the Church, by the Vatican, by the Byzantine Empire, by the bankers in Venice. That's what Brady and I were talking this morning about the show. So I don't know if you wanted to start talking about some of that stuff and the origins of the Templars, the origins of the Hospitaliers, and what provoked them in 1096 to decide, all right, we're going to go to Jerusalem and start kicking this hornet's nest.
Yeah, that's a great framing of I guess what I'll contribute. And I've got a few little images too to show. Yeah, but you gotta keep in mind, like the first crusade actually wasn't the first crusade. The first crusade was in 1096 by Pope Urban II, and that was a crusade called the Poor People's Crusade. So it was basically getting a bunch of untrained poor people somehow under a few cult leaders, like this guy, the hermit. I forget some. Anyway, you had these rabble rousers who just got everybody into a fizzy. They passed out swords and said, "Okay, we're gonna go march onto the Holy Land and retake Jerusalem." So they got massacred, right? All of these useful idiots walked right into the fire, got hammered, and then that created enough fervor. I mean, tens of thousands of people died. Their families were angry. All of a sudden, there was a lot of fertile soil. It's kind of like a 9/11 type of operation in the day, right? Create a calamity, destroy families, create a psychosis in Europe, especially in France. But at the time, France wasn't France, right? It was a different set of borders. And then just use that to then generate mass public support and desire for a full-blown crusade, which is what was unleashed in 1098. But why was all of this done, of Christian killing Muslim fighting back, killing Christians, Jews in the first crusade? There was the Jewish massacre. Tens of thousands of Jews were killed as well by the early crusaders. So it was like a real bloodbath of cultures who not that long earlier had been working together. So a few weeks ago, we talked about we had a show that ended up talking about why real patriots don't support Hitler. I think that's what we tentatively named it. And we went into a little bit of a discourse on Khazaria. Just to be quick, to recap some of the essentials there, the period of around 750 to 850 was a period that was super rich in cultural and economic growth and really powerful dynamics. So you had in China, you had the Tang dynasty that came online in 618. It revived the Silk Road that had gone sallow when the Han dynasty had collapsed in 200 AD. So that Silk Road idea of a foreign policy based upon exchange with your other cultures, other civilizations through the Middle East, through what's today Russia, was really, it became a glue that started binding different peoples who were otherwise completely separated from each other, right? It was there wasn't a lot of communication. All of a sudden, the Silk Road routes were revived. And then you had Chinese communications with the Muslim world. That's Harun al-Rashid with the big funny hat, who was the leader of the Abbasid dynasty. On the left-hand side is Charlemagne. In the middle is an image of King Bulan, who was the Turkic king from a Turkic kingdom that had been created from the westernmost front of the Göktürk Empire. So around 550, 560, there was this massive, expansive Göktürk Empire. It unfortunately, like so many empires, was weakened. It broke up into parts, an eastern and a western cognate. The eastern was destroyed, and then the western was also destroyed by different factions. The Chinese emperor went to war with the eastern faction, and that's why the emperors of China were known under the Tang dynasty as the heavenly Kaigan. That was actually the name for the Chinese emperor for about a century. Now that left a massive amount of independence for the most western portion, which was the Khazars. They soon did their transition into Judaism. They were also a key part of that's the Khazars over here, right? That's the famous maps of Khazaria, much of today's Russia, Ukraine, central, the Georgia, the Caspian Sea region. So on the other hand here, that's the Tang Empire and the growth of the Tang Empire as it consolidated and continued to flourish. It had it was a bastion for Muslims and for Jews who were all living, working in the Tang Empire. The Muslim army was sent down to put down a civil war and was granted a lot of territory to stay as a big thank you for saving the empire. And that's why you have so many Muslims in the west of China today. The same thing for Khazaria. They didn't have, like we mentioned, they didn't have their own Jewish army. They had actually been provided an army from the Muslims, from the Abbasid dynasty. So they had 10,000 Muslim warriors that lived in Khazaria, controlled the weapons, and their contract was, we will defend you to the degree that you don't start a war with any Muslim country. And to the degree that you don't do that, we will defend you. If you do that, we will fight with the Muslim side of things. Charlemagne, that was his territory before it got broken up into today's European states. This is the growth of it. Now, keep in mind, Charlemagne's grandfather, Charles Martel, had overthrown the Merovingians. The Merovingians were sort of a pagan, Gnostic, pseudo-Christian cult of warlords who took control of a big chunk of former Western Rome. They were always pagan.
Yep. And I want to point out, Alan was asking about the Moors' conquest of Europe. So what happened was the Merovingians were fighting with Charles Martel. That would be Charlemagne's grandfather. Mm-hmm. After Charles Martel defeats them, the Moors then come across Northern Africa and into Spain, and they take Spain. And then Martel stops them at the Battle of Tours in France. He unites like all of the Frankish tribes that he had been fighting against, unites all of them. They make a stand against the Muslims. They drive them back to Spain. Spain is then controlled by the Muslims, by the Moors, for 800 years. And then you have Harun al-Rashid comes in like 100 years later and apologizes to Charlemagne, or whatever, like 60 years later, apologizes to Charlemagne, says, look, they should have never done that. The Moors should have never come into Europe. We apologize. Here's a gift. There's famous paintings of that meeting. He invites the Europeans to come to his learning centers where they're performing surgery and they're doing advanced academia, advanced studies, far more advanced than what was happening in Europe or in China.
Yep.
You also have, by the way, the Mongols in like the 12th century. You have the Mongols in the Middle East as part of like the Crusades. They're in that region too, fighting. So the Mongols that have driven all the way from China and driven, we talked about the Turkmen being driven out of Central Asia, driven down into modern day Turkmenistan, and then eventually the Ottomans move in to modern day Turkey and set up their empire. So the people who chased them were still around in the Middle East, and they were, when they chased them down to that region, they're around, and so they're fighting the Muslims, they're fighting the Christians, and they have a presence as well.
It's a mess. And actually, I was reading an article on how Venice rigged the world's biggest financial collapse, and it was by Paul Gallagher from EIR, and it's about like a 30-page exceptional study where he demonstrates the role of the Venetian bankers in providing both money and intelligence to the Mongol hordes, and people like Marco Polo's grandfather, the entire Venetian apparatus had sole trading rights on Mongol-controlled territories, and the Mongols were it seems like, in the way I'm coming to understand it, is they were used kind of like ISIS has been created, used, and deployed as a battering ram against nations you want to overthrow by the Anglo-American intelligence agencies that created, cultivated, groomed, and deployed ISIS as sort of a marcher lord. And that seems to be sort of what the Mongols were deployed to do. So the Seljuks, right? The Seljuk Empire had a lot on their plate, all of these different, Muslim groups that were there trying to figure out what's going on. They were getting onslaughts on the one side from Europe, and then on the other side from the Mongols. So it was just crazy situation to deal with. Now, the thing here again that just to have this all contrasted is that just 200 years earlier, we had this dynamic of a Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Confucian, Buddhist, intercivilizational dynamic of cooperation, commerce. And the way you can know that this wasn't just some other imperial strategy is, and this is like a diagram here of the Silk Roads from the Han Dynasty that was revived with the Tang. So these are the different trade routes all the way through the Middle East, but there's this upper route here through the what's called the Steppes Silk Road, which goes into today's, or back then it was Khazaria, which was a bridge point down to the north-south transportation routes into Charlemagne's Europe.
All horses in the world, by the way. All horses, by the way, in the world come from the steppe. So every horse in the world, if you draw back its route, they all come from the steppe, which is that region where it says Russia, the word Russia. It's like between that and the Altai Mountains. That's like the steppe.
Wow. I didn't know that. That's interesting. So yeah, I mean, Charlemagne, this guy was ushering in a Renaissance period. There was mass population growth, massive literacy, huge discoveries, new architectural designs, innovations in the arts and sciences, and cooperation and peace building amongst nations. So there were efforts to try to get Charlemagne to go to a crusade to take back the Holy Land by, I think it was Pope Stephen III. And instead, he basically had his envoys, who were Jewish envoys that he selected from Septimania, to go down and to arrange a peace treaty whereby the idea was the deed for the Holy Land would be given by Harun al-Rashid, the head of the Abbasid Empire, and and Charlemagne was given the deed. He was basically told, you will own it and we will protect it, and that's the way that worked very nicely. It kept the peace for another 200 years. But the unfortunate thing is that Charlemagne's grandsons were stupid, and they went along with the strategy run by the papacy at the time, which was always trying to get a war, and that involves divide to conquer, by cutting up the kingdom into 3 separate kingdoms. So you had three grandsons, one Louis, Lothar, and Charles. Lothar became like Lotharingia is this zone in the middle. And you see on the upper right-hand side of this map, this is in 1852. And then this becomes the basis of wars between brothers. So all of a sudden now you have, with the Treaty of Verdun, you have an agreement that Charles and Louis will always fight together against Lothar under all points of conflict and contention. So this creates then both boundaries that create the basis of today's Europe. You know, people wonder where do those borders come from? Where do the hostilities between the French and the Germans come from? You can't understand those questions if you don't look at this manipulation in the 9th century to create Lotharingia. And sure enough, when you look at Geoffrey de Bouillon, he was a prince of Lotharingia as well. So it was a very, very controlled environment by this time. And this all had to be destroyed. So the trade routes were that were built up during the Silk Road were the same trade routes that were co-opted for the Crusades. So all of the Crusaders were then using Silk Road trade routes, but not to trade goods, but rather to trade weapons and blood. And that's the Seljuk Empire too, which has an interesting strategy behind its growth process too, and how it interacted with its Muslim neighbors.
Interesting.
And that's the map you showed already. Oh yeah.
Real quick, I just want to I want to share this real quick.
Oops. Hold on.
Oh, sorry. Yep. I was clicking when you were clicking. Alsace-Lorraine. This is like one of the most contested pieces of land in Western Europe. Look at the location of it between France and Germany. I mean, World War I and World War II. This was a major like bargaining chip between those two.
Lotharingia. That's Lotharingia.
So that just made me think of that. Like I didn't know that history that you just shared. So that's a very interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, and all 19th, 18th, 17th century conflicts between the French and the Germans always had Lotharingia, that whole territory, as the trigger to fight over and kill over for generations. It's really, it was a perfect formula for forever wars. Really something.
Interesting.
So back to the.
Before we continue, should we do ad reads? Maybe.
Oh shoot! Yeah, we're running through time, man. Yeah, let's do. Here, I'll do the first 2 ad reads, and do the second 2.
Sounds good.
1 second. What's the first one?
The first one I'm seeing Bitcoin River BTC.
Okay. Got it.
Yep.
All right. Are you ready to diversify your assets with Bitcoin? Introducing River, the official Bitcoin partner of Badlands Media, where you can navigate the world of Bitcoin with confidence. With River, you can buy Bitcoin like a pro. With the assurance of being licensed and regulated right here in the United States, River ensures your Bitcoin journey is smooth and secure with on-demand live support at your fingertips. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase required. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/river to create your River account today. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. River, shaping the future of finance, one Bitcoin at a time. I went through that too fast. All right.
It's all good. Good job.
Thank you.
And it looks like the other 2 looks like are just videos.
Oh, that's easy. You want to just run through both of those?
Yeah, let's just go ahead and do both of those, I think. Because there's only 3 ads, it looks like, today. So
sounds good.
The Flex Tactical by Energy is the most rugged and ready portable power station on the market. Recently, Energy won contracts from the U.S. Army and Air Force to create a modular solar power station suitable for field and combat operations. We designed the Tactical for heavy-duty use in extreme environments. It is the most durable, versatile, portable power station ever built. Do you want the peace of mind that comes with knowing you have the most advanced, emergency-ready, durable, portable solar power solution? Do you want a power station that you know will be there in almost any condition? Order your Flex Tactical Edition today. Take charge of your safety and be ready for anything.
Investigating covert CIA operations, investigating the CIA in general, is now off limits to the press unless you have what Ted Turner called proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which when you're talking about covert operations, you're never going to find as a journalist.
Conspiracy theorists, kooks, crackpots.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
We don't engage in assassinations and kidnappings and things of that kind. As far as I know, we never have.
1/3 of my staff in this task force was covert action, was propagandists.
Honestly, Twitter or X now is really where I get like all my news.
The unholy alliance between the intelligence community, social media platforms, and legacy media outlets.
And we will have to summon the same capacity to adapt to new circumstances and to meet changing times while upholding timeless ideals.
Fake, disgusting news.
It's one of those pieces of what we've seen around January 6th that is pushed by people that want to suggest that this attack was something other than what it really was.
This is why so many people can't stand the mainstream media, and why there's a hardcore animosity towards the media that is pretty much commensurate or equivalent to the animosity towards Congress.
Was that your laptop?
For real, I don't know.
You mean the laptop is now another Russia hoax?
That's exactly what.
Is this where you're
exactly
going?
what.
This is where he's going. The laptop is Russia.
Gentlemen, I want to stay on the issue of rape.
We have an army of digital soldiers. This was irregular warfare at its finest.
Fuck you. War.
Interesting. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen that that trailer. You and I haven't talked about that, but that's a documentary that John commissioned that a few people from Badlands have been working on. And the guy who did it, who they brought in to do it, is the same guy who made the new Flynn documentary.
Really? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Adam Riva. Yeah, so we're doing Garth this week. I'll be flying out tomorrow morning to Dallas. We're going to do a premiere on Friday evening of that film. Adam Riva is going to be at GART. I think they're going to do a panel afterwards of Adam and John, maybe a few others. They're also doing a showing on Monday in Florida. I think Zach Payne is hosting that with a few other people. Colonel Tanner Watkins texted me. I think she's going to plan to go to that as well. She's in the area, it sounds like. So if you're interested in going into that, reach out to one of us, like DM us on X or whatever, me or John or Zach or whoever. I'll put you in touch with them. I don't really know anything about it other than I'll just put you in touch with the right people. But if you're buying a virtual ticket to GART, you will have automatic access to this premiere. I think they're also selling just individual tickets if you just want to watch that one documentary in the panel afterwards. I think it's $10 to do that. And then I think John said they plan on just releasing it for free to the public in May. So this is just for like early access, but I haven't seen the film yet. I'm very excited about it. It sounds like the premise of it. John's watched it a few times and he says the premise of it is it's a film that covers like all the things that we've talked about on this show, specifically like the CIA and all the stuff that they've been doing, but it's a film that's designed to send to your normie friends. So while a lot of the information in it is probably going to be like information that we like this community has already examined, it's like it's not dumbed down, but it's simplified and concise and put into a format like a documentary format, which I think a lot of people today love, like watching documentaries in like the Netflix era, you know. So it's something you can send to your friends who aren't into any of this stuff, and it might wake them up.
It's like a gateway drug to the truth.
Exactly. That's exactly, which I think is brilliant. I think it's what we need right now, especially right now, like with the stuff that you and I have been talking about on this show and a lot of the stuff that just in this community people have been talking about. I think it's an important tool that we need in our arsenal. So yeah, cool. I'm excited for I'm pumped to see it. Really pumped to see it. I
am.
But yeah,
too, all
so
of a sudden. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll make sure that you can see it too. We'll figure that out.
Okay. Thank you.
Because I know you're trapped. You're trapped up there north of the wall in Canada. So we want to make sure that that the wildlings up in Canada can see the film.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I apologize for the long digress, but let's get back to what you were saying. You were in the midst of talking about the Seljuk Empire.
Well, I just want to get across just the context, right? The global context what happened before the Crusades. So even the point I really wanted to emphasize is that there was this natural, what you could consider an era where we began to mature as a species, overcoming the systems of empire of might makes right. You know, the idea that power is based upon your ability to subdue the weaker in by force, or the idea that value is simply what you can steal or extract from slave labor or through war booty. That old archaic idea that's still unfortunately today very, very powerful in shaping world policy was something we were overcoming 1,300 years ago, you know? And it's just, it's a little bit of that classical dramatic tragedy that all good art, I think, feeds out of, to just sort of see that communion of civilizations working together under a Silk Road dynamic, the idea of that there's a greater value in cooperating and creating together and sharing, and not going to war based on your differences, but finding points that make us all human first, and whatever religion as a secondary aspect, that we respect the differences, but we're going to look for what makes us best, right? As neighbors. And so that had to be destroyed and disrupted. So the Crusades were a really, really valuable way of doing that. Now there's a shifting of the gears. I'm gonna do something that might seem disjointed, but it isn't. Reminding people of the Alex Jones tweet, right, featuring that bloody Templar managed, actually it was a Templar Malta or Hospitaller co-managed Kingdom of Jerusalem that was in place for about 2 centuries. This is what people wonder, what was Kissinger talking about when he told the Jerusalem Post in 2012, asked what would the future of Israel be in 10 years, and his answer was, in 10 years there will be no Israel. Nobody knew how to interpret what the hell Henry Kissinger just said, because they always thought of Kissinger as being a lover of Zionism and a lover of stability. But what does he mean? And he did not elaborate upon that. Now, Kissinger is also a Knight of the Order of St. George and St. Michael. That's a British imperial knighthood, which ties into another knighthood that was co-opted by the British called the Venerable Order of St. John in Jerusalem. Every single lieutenant governor in Canada, for example, is a member of the Venerable Order of St. John of Jerusalem. It's an Anglican British imperial variation of the Knights Hospitaller. There's several orders that it sort of broke into, one of them being the Knights of Malta, the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. And then you had this other one set up in 1888 by Queen Victoria. And every single high-level administrator in the Canadian deep state is always a member of that thing. You have the variation for the Catholic branch, which is the Maltese Knights. So, okay, keep in mind this flag. This is the flag designed by Geoffrey of Bouillon, right, from Lotharingia, who ushered in the First Crusade under Pope Urban II. This is Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley's been turned into a bit of a cartoon figure for a lot of people, but this guy is on a much higher level and represents something much more powerful in terms of the oligarchy's inner religion than people realize. What you have there is Baphomet on the right-hand side. Baphomet is a deity that a demon that Crowley took very seriously. What you have there on the right hand is the scribblings of Crowley with a certain little symbol here next to Baphomet. Okay, Baphomet's this androgynous creature with the goat's head, the flaming torch on the head, boobs, little staff for an erect schlong, pointing up and down for hermetic as above below, goat hooves,
bearded, like he's bearded to signify like he's a man, but he has breasts. Yep.
Yeah. And typically one arm is supposed to be a woman's arm, the other is a man's arm. For the left hand, right hand path, one pointing to a dark moon, the other to a light moon. You know, you got the little pentagon on the forehead, and a couple of staffs, one being the Thelema. So this is one of the symbols that Crowley selected for his religion of Thelema from his book of law that he had channeled by one of his Babylonian, what do you call them? Anyway, he had a lot of women that he did bad things to, and he used them as channelers to give him messages from demons.
Yeah, it's what's it called? Sacred prostitution. I mean,
Kinda like
that's
that.
that's what the art. That's what like the thing is that when you use women, like you use sex magic, it's part of like your ritual, right?
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah. So you have here the different Thelema, Golden Dawn. You got his Argentum Astrum, Sex Mysteria Mysticum Maximum, Ordo Templi Orientis. So you got these different like Kabbalistic groups that Crowley created and ran at different times. So again, Baphomet is key, and there's that symbol once again, right? Keep in mind, there's this. This is a little zeroing in on this. What's called Crowley's Baphomet cross, and Crowley actually called it the 11-fold de Molay cross, also known as the Baphomet cross, was the magical signature of Aleister Crowley when he was the 10th degree in the Ordo Templi Orientis. It is made up of, and by the way, L. Ron Hubbard is a prodigy of Crowley who created the OT, or operating Thetan system in Scientology as far as a 6th degree rite of initiation process that is sort of a bit of a sick, evil joke later on. It's made up of 11 intersections with 3 inside and 8 along the outside. Consider the Book of Law, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that's basically something to just hold in mind. Now we got the Crusades, basically a bloodbath. The official symbol selected, again, was this particular Kingdom of Jerusalem cross, the de Molay cross, as Crowley called it. Kingdom of Jerusalem, state formed, 1099, right? We already went through that. Now, the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem is a very important thing. I'm going to say something about that because that's another order that's very active today with 30,000 members operating within mostly Jerusalem in the Middle East today. This is Albert Pike, Morals and Dogma, 1871, describing here how in 1118, 9 knights crusaders in the East, among whom were Geoffrey de Saint-Omer and Hugh de Payens, consecrated themselves to religion and took oath between the hands of the Patriarch of Constantinople, a see always secretly or openly hostile to that of Rome from the time of Photius. The avowed object of the Templars was to protect the Christians who came to visit the holy places. Their secret object was the rebuilding of the Temple of Solomon on the model of the prophesied by Ezekiel. Right, that's important because they were actually called the knights, the poor knights of Solomon's Temple. And keep in mind, just a few weeks back, we went through a whole presentation on the obsession to rebuild Solomon's Temple as part of this eschatology that also involves what King Edward VII was doing with the Palestinian Exploration Fund and the Quattuor Coronati Lodge, the Freemasonic archaeology lodge, which was providing material that was then used by the British in manipulating the Bedouins and the Hashemites and other groups against each other in the course of the later destruction that was done both to the Ottoman Empire, but also the creation of this Zionist state. So a lot of this stuff goes back to what Pike is talking about with the Templars, the poor knights of Solomon's Temple, which is a Kabbalistic knight, which Crowley properly identifies as as something that's tied to Baphomet. This rebuilding, formerly predicted by the Judaizing mystics of the earlier ages, had become the secret dream of the patriarchs of the Orient. The Temple of Solomon, rebuilt and consecrated to Catholic worship, would become, in effect, the metropolis of the universe. The East would prevail over the West, and the patriarchs of Constantinople would possess themselves of the papal power. Albert Pike, Morals and Dogma. Okay, so important idea. There's no particularly, anyway, yeah, I'll withhold. Couple of the orders here that we've been talking about. You've already shown a picture of the Templars, that one of the soldiers right there with one of the Templar crosses. There you have the Knights of Malta logo with the 2 wings and the Maltese cross in the middle. And then in the bottom, below the Maltese cross, you see that little same Kingdom of Jerusalem logo, right, under the shield. And that's a couple of Maltese knights, just from the Great Priory of Order of Malta. So where does the both Templars and Malta come from? So the first one I'll just address here quickly because they were both created. The Knights of Malta is a name that was acquired out of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. So it is the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. They were created in 1098, just as the first Crusades were being launched. They were officially recognized as a sort of parallel military force within the the Catholic Church in 1119, which is also the same year that the Templars were created, 1119, just in time to start rallying the ground for Crusade number 2. So where did that symbol come from? This is extremely important. One of the key zones of control of the world where the leading patricians of the Roman Empire of the Western branch went when it collapsed were both the lagoons of Venice, but not just there. There were several city-states that became maritime dominant powers around Italy and even Turkey. But namely, the one that matters the most here is Amalfi, the city-state of Amalfi, which was the most powerful maritime force in the world. It was the central command of the Benedictine monks, the Benedictine order that had been set up in 520 by the Order of St. Benedict. The Order of St. Benedict was given control by one of these leading patricians of Rome, who became a follower in 520, of the Isle of Capri. The Isle of Capri is sort of the base of operations of Emperor Tiberius. It's where the cult of Mithra and Cybele, even to this day, people, tourists can go to the caverns, the catacombs, and the Mithraeum. Oh, you have? Really?
Well, I've been to Capri. I've been to Capri. I don't know if I went into caves in Capri. I don't know if I went into the catacombs you're talking about, but I mean, I went to Capri and spent like a week in Amalfi. So and I got to walk around. It's an old place, man. Old place. Lots of money there, though. I mean, you'll see a lot of money, just in terms of like modern day. Like you see just like billion-dollar yachts like anchored all over Capri and all that stuff. So there's definitely something weird going on there. They also have lemons that are like this big. The lemons that grow in Capri are literally, they look deformed. They're not even like circles. They look like they have cancer, but they're like giant tumors and they're huge. And that's what they make their limoncello from, is those giant monstrous. I'm sure they're cancerous lemons, but yeah, I'm probably going to have all the I'm going to have all the Italians coming after me now for insulting their lemons and their limoncello. Limoncello is gross, by the way. I want to be on the record that limoncello is disgusting, but it's like a after dinner like liquor, like lemon flavored liquor. It's gross. But anyway, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, it's so fun. All right. Well, I was reading too that all of the taxis on Capri are like Cadillacs, that like white convertibles. That's it.
Yeah.
So there's like a certain luxury, and it's such a beautiful. I mean, I've only seen pictures. I wasn't lucky.
It's
enough
gorgeous.
To go there,
I mean, it's like that area is gorgeous, which is why I think wealthy people are attracted there. It's like a huge tourist destination.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
absolutely,
it's gorgeous. Yeah.
So they were, but that particular isle. So that's the thing, right? That was the sort of headquarters of the cult of Mithra, and the cult of Mithra sort of went underground at a certain point when they were legalized by Strabo, not Strabo. It was Stilicho, the sort of overseer of Theodosius II of the Western Roman Empire in 390. All the oracles were burnt, right? The oracles of Apollo, of the Sibyl sort of scriptures. And so they went underground. They started, utilizing a lot of these underground Gnostic Christian cults to sort of keep the satanic tradition alive under the surface. Now, the Benedictines received in 530 or so the Isle of Capri. They were given it, and the Isle of Capri is on Amalfi, so it's just off the coast of Amalfi, sorry. And that was the dominant city-state before Venice became the alpha. There were other ones like Genoa and Pisa that continued, but that was really the top dog for a while. Now, Amalfi produced a fellow by the name of Blessed Gerard Sasso. He's the Benedictine founder of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. So he comes from Amalfi, the guy who sets up the order. He used the Amalfi city symbol as the basis for the Order of Malta. Now, the merchants from Amalfi had already been given the rights the Caliph Az-Zahir in 1023 to rebuild the Temple of Sepulchre, which is the Temple to St. John in the Holy Land. So that was a mistake on the Caliph's part. He was like, all right, you can come on in. I trust you guys are doing business with me. Come on in. And that sort of created a foundation for what later was created as an infrastructure built up to facilitate the Crusades, because it involved getting people on the ground for a few generations or a few decades to infiltrate it from within, set up different structures within the caliphate, which at the time was the Fatimid that you brought up already. The other order that we have to keep in mind that works, that's nominally a rival with the Hospitallers, is the Templars. So when I say Hospitallers, I'm using that interchangeably with Malta. But the Templars are the nominal rival, but really it was more of this right-hand, left-hand path thing. The Templars, that's a little image of some of the Templars doing one of their Baphomet worshiping ceremonies. This was done in the 19th century, mid-19th century. The Baphomet they worship might not have looked specifically like the one that was drawn up by what's his name? French occultist, forgot his name. Anyway, but so they did get accused. People say, oh, they didn't mean it because they were just being tortured, and so they would have admitted to anything. But there was apparently a lot more information or evidence than just simple admissions as well that this was being done. But the point being, they had their headquarters under the Temple Mount, today's Temple Mount. That was where the Templars were based as their headquarters in the Holy Land. And they provided the infrastructure, the means of carrying out war. And they were also the ones that controlled all the banking. So the vast majority of European banking was not controlled by Jews. It was controlled by Templars. And once the Templars were taken down, well, anyway, that's another side story. So who created the Templars? Again, got to look to the Benedictines. That's Saint Bernard de Clairvaux. On the right-hand side, he's preaching the Second Crusade. On the left-hand side, he's giving some sort of a deed to some knight for some reason. Who cares? But the point is, this guy is a sicko. He is a radical Benedictine himself. This is all of the painting of Bernard mostly feature him drinking milk from the teat of the Virgin Mary, which is a really weird thing. All of these involve him drinking milk from the breast of the Virgin Mary, because that was one of the supposed apocryphal what do you call it? When you become a saint, you have to do some miracles. That's one of the miracles. Basically, he's praying, and all of a sudden the statue of the Virgin Mary started lactating, and he started suckling the statue's boob.
All right. Wait a minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm just misinterpreting these paintings I'm looking at, because I know they're old and they have cracks and everything. Is she squirting milk multiple feet into this guy's face? Is that what these paintings all show?
Oh, yes, indeedy. Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty messed up, man.
And there's a lot more. Almost. Yeah. It's super messed up. And you got this weird thing, right? So within the Gnostic,
with Jesus sitting right there too, like baby Jesus, and you're gonna squirt the milk over baby Jesus' head and into this guy's face. This seems like sexual. There's definitely something sexual about this. This guy's
there definitely is. There's an ambiguity between the Mary. Are you talking about within the Gnostic Christian sects? Are you talking about Mary Magdalene, the prostitute, or are you talking about Mary, the Virgin Mother? Is it the mother? Is it the whore? Right. So you got this weird ambiguity that the Gnostics they capitalize on. So a lot of the churches to Mary, the order of Mary, this and that, and the various sacred nunneries associated with that are often, when you scratch behind the surface, you'll probably tend to find something a little bit more inclined to the orgiastic rites of initiation one would have expected to see at a Sabellian, orgy fest, some Orphic ritual. So that was the sort of thing that Bernard de Clairvaux was into. Now, he himself was a Cistercian. He put two popes on the throne of the Vatican. This is a grouping that was radical Benedictines. So again, both this guy who creates the Templars, he creates the charter for the Templars that calls for, basically it's a male-only Mithraic-like sect of warriors, kind of like what the Roman Legion was. And they're prone to massive self-whipping, all of these things. They get a little too big for their britches, and they end up wanting to buy sort of all of Europe. That doesn't work. They get taken down. So it's kind of like the Nazis going off the rails, needing to be put down, But then the other thing that's really interesting in all of this that ties us to the present day is that the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre that I mentioned still exist. That's their official logo today. There's, like I said, they're in charge of administering all of the Christian sites in the Middle East, as well as schools education galore. They work very closely with the UN. That's a picture of, King Charles and the Pope, the Jesuit Pope, who is currently bringing an integration between the Anglicans and the Catholic Church. Cardinal Edwin O'Brien is the Grand Master of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. That's him to this very day. They're all Grand Masters. That's the language they use. Same thing with the Knights of Malta, or it's always Grand Master. So the same Freemasonic language as Pope. So in 1949, Pope Pius the 12th. That's the Nazi Pope, decreed that the Grand Master of the Order should be a cardinal of the Holy Roman Church and assigned the position of the Grand Prior of the Patriarch of Jerusalem. I cited Albert Pike earlier just because I wanted to set the stage for one of the ceremonies they do every Easter with the Knights of Sepulchre, which has this weird Ku Klux Klan vibe going. I'm not too sure exactly the logic behind the ghosts, but that was directly what inspired Albert Pike when he created the KKK. Yeah,
I saw people posting videos this year of this ritual, of this ceremony, and like that's what everyone was saying. Everyone was like, "Whoa, those guys are wearing like Klan hoods."
Yeah, it's hard to miss. It's a bit jarring.
yeah. It's like it's a spinning image, man.
So yeah, I mean, this is like how the cult thing works, right? And Albert Pike with the Knights of the Golden Circle that he was overseeing as well to create this slave empire with Cuba as the central capital in the 1850s. That's what was one of the ideas, was that it was going to partake in these various Jesuitical Maltese orders that were tied in a weird way to these parallel governments that have this occult underpinning that we're getting a taste of with this thing. And just to be quick here, in the middle of the Second Crusade, the Fourth Crusade, you had the right when it was finishing, Venice takes control of all maritime trade routes and basically overthrows the Byzantine Empire as becoming now the top alpha of the world empire, which it maintains for another several centuries. Franciscan order is also thus established by the Crusader Pope. I forgot his name now. Innocent III, I think, inappropriately named Innocent. So the Franciscan order is created. That's one of the emblems for the Franciscan order of minor something. I'm forgetting it all of a sudden. Oh, Minorite order. That's it. So the St. Francis Order of the Minorites. So again, they use the Kingdom of Jerusalem flag, aka the flag of de Molay, Baphomet. You had the Children's Crusade launched in 1209 as well, right? So when the Franciscan order being established, you have the Children's Crusade is launched, which is the one that people forget about, where you had something like 40,000 children under the age of like 16, like kids, sent out to the Holy Land, and they're never seen from again. It's like the biggest child trafficking operation that was ever organized by the Templars and the Knights Hospitaller. Yeah, the Children's Crusade. You can Google that.
So were they killed in battle, or were they kidnapped and like sacrificed?
Most of them you never saw from again. So whether they went into became slaves abroad, or whether they became ritual sacrifice, whether they became, I don't know. Nobody knows. But the mind is led to wonder when you look at who the players are in that operation. And the story goes, you had this kid who was like 12 years old, starts getting like a Greta Thunberg type, who starts getting visions from on high and starts preaching the crusade. And the kid's just inspired, and all of a sudden the parents all want their kids to go and join this cult leader child who has handlers, and they all just go and send off their kids and don't see them again. So it's just sick.
Sounds like modern day Hollywood.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like Disney World.
Yeah, it's like go make my kid famous. Like, go make my kid famous, Harvey Weinstein. Like, I'm not concerned about who you're actually having him meet with when I'm not around.
Yeah, P. Diddy. Let's give over rights of ownership of my child to P. Diddy, and he'll take care of my kid's career. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And just quick, there's Francis of Assisi. He had one of his holy awakenings when he was in a sacred cave. It's always sacred caves where they get their holy awakenings. And this was the same cave that Benedict got his awakening in when he was meditating in a cave. So he went to the Benedict's cave, got his religious experience to create his own order. And his own order was based upon basically preaching to animals. So he became the ecologist saint. That's him preaching to the birds. And his logic was, well, since God created everything, thus everything must be equally sacred, and thus trees and birds and dogs and babies and humans must all be equally sacred with no differentiation whatsoever of a hierarchy of importance or value. So that's one of the things that the ecologists and the pagan like Gaia revivalists always try to do, is eliminate the qualitative differentiation between grandma or your baby and a chicken. So one of the branches of what he did. Now he had
That's what they were doing in Arabia, like when Al-Saud and Wahhabi were going around. They were like worshiping trees, worshiping rocks, worshiping they're worshiping like an inanimate object and like burning goats and stuff. Yeah, and it's like that. It was like the visual of people seeing that is like what got like Al-Wahhab. That's like why Wahhabism kind of like took root, is because they needed to return to like the orthodoxy of Islam, because people were going in and doing this pagan stuff. It's like these cycles just keep happening in the Middle East, where you keep having these cycles of like a cult pagan kind of worship, and it's just fascinating.
Okay,
you have that connection.
So that's why I love what you just said, because what you just said, people need to hold that in their mind, right? Because this is that guy on the right here with the dog and the Charlemagne globe with the little like cross on it there that King Charles was holding. That's Dominic de Guzman. Dominic de Guzman and Francis, that's them right there. On the right is Dominic de Guzman, and the left is Francis. Francis of Assisi. He founded the monastic order of the Brothers Preachers, which laid the foundations for the Papal Inquisition. He created the Dominican order. So the Dominicans in 1215 were sanctioned by the papacy, the same pope that sanctioned the creation of the Children's Crusade and the Franciscans, as two separate orders that would seem to be rivals, but they weren't. One was a reaction to the other. So the Dominicans were then the hard conservative reactionary force against the preaching to birds and to trees of the Gaia revival Franciscans. And they were actually friends, collaborators who would work together. And so this became, when you look at the Inquisition, that was brought into Spain, into Portugal, into Venice, everywhere. And it was generally run by Dominicans about 70% of the time, and about 30% of the time Franciscans ran the Inquisition, which basically saw a hard reaction, like a right-wing reactionary, hard conservative like reaction to this ultra-liberal blah of Gaia in the church, where they were basically for centuries running the kings, the princes, running terror campaigns, burning people alive to extract confessions of, and there were witches. You know, that was the thing. There were Gnostic witches. There were Satanists doing bad things, which then fueled the response grouping around the Dominican Inquisition groups that then just did more bloodbath, right? So you had this dual gang, counter gang, reactionary force, that a dominant cycle. Yeah. And then out of that, Venice was the only thing that sort of dominated and grew. And when Venice grew, the way that they screwed over Constantinople in that Fourth Crusade in 1204, when it ended, was they basically got a bunch of Christians from the West to get on boats and to pay off the debts, that because all the boats were supplied by Venice. And the Venice was charging a lot of money. They were like, well, why don't you go and ransack Constantinople, and you could pay us your debts, and then you'll have more money than you need to both pay off your debts to Venice, but also then to go and wage war in the Holy Land as a layover. Now they did such a massacre of Constantinople. It was like the biggest city in the world, and they massacred men, women, and children and looted it, which is why Venice has the weird architecture that it does today. That they basically couldn't go to the Holy Land, and they just went back home with their money. And Venice both got a ton of cash, but they also got all of Venice's maritime trade routes, and they became the dominant force for, like I said, up until like Napoleon and then really even after that in the form of like what Venice did to take over the control of the British Empire and the Dutch in the 17th century. So yeah, that's like just a quick little foray into my ponderings of the relevance of the Crusade and why I'm pissed off at Alex Jones for encouraging.
Yeah.
Shit.
Well, those are some like really, really great points you're making there, especially at the end. I mean, again, going back to the movie, because I feel like the film is a good universal framing, since I think a lot of people probably have seen it who are watching this. Remember in the film when Liam Neeson is instructing Bailey and Orlando Bloom how to find him, because he goes to recruit him and it's like the hero's journey. So he rejects him and then he is forced to like go follow him later. He says, go to where the men speak Italian and then keep walking until they start speaking something else and look for us there at Messina. And he's talking about Sicily. So he's basically saying, go all the way down Italy and then cross over into Sicily. He's like that. And that's where you'll find us. So it's like, go to Italy and we're going to get on ships in Italy and then and we're going to travel to the Holy Land through Italy. So it's just, I mean, it's like all the knights who were going there were being funneled into where you just pointed out. And yeah, so that's really, really interesting. Don't know if you have anything else. If not, I have just like some wrap up stuff to that we can jump into.
Okay.
Just kind of circling back, I got some Jin Saki circle back points, some notes I'd written down. To touch on what you were talking about with like the Malta, like the Knights of Malta and the Hospitaliers. So what these guys were doing is like on, ostensibly like at the surface level, is they were setting up hospitals on these islands that are in the Mediterranean that they controlled. So they would go and take control of the islands. So Cyprus was a big one, like that. Hospital of Rhodes. When I was in architecture school, healthcare architecture, like hospital architecture was like what I chose to focus on. And so when I did my thesis, I did a lot of studies on the hospitals of the Hospitaliers, especially the one in Rhodes, because they seem to have a really thorough understanding of holistic medicine, and basically like using sunlight, like using like nature, like using natural remedies to remedy like pretty serious ailments. And that just seems to be completely lost now in the modern age of medicine, because obviously you can't make money by using like natural remedies to heal things. So I thought that was like homeopathic, like that kind of stuff. Very interesting that like that the Hospitaliers seem to be pretty educated on all that. And like really down to the way the modern
Hospitaliers, the modern Hospitaliers, like their current organizing of their system of medicine, that's currently what they're doing.
No, these are the hospitals from the Crusades. So like the old hospitals that are now like museums. So you can go online and there's literally like these things are fully modeled and you can like take online tours of them. And so I was basically like, as an architecture student, I was like mapping out, like I was like doing drawings of these places by like taking the online tour and like using Google Maps to like measure it and everything, because a lot of it's like an outdoor campus. It's amazing, like these walking gardens that they have like in the hospital, and it's incredible architecture. But like down to the way they designed their hospitals, they were designing their hospitals so that the patients, which were knights from the Crusades, were getting access to sunlight, access to nature, like walking through the gardens, and that was helping them heal. And there are now scientific studies from the past 25 years that prove that exposure to all that stuff, you reduce the need for pain medicine by 35%, you increase your healing time by 30%, which when you're a hospital administrator, all that becomes, dollar figures and savings and all that, which is how, as an architect, you convince these guys to incorporate that stuff into the architecture. But a lot of it gets value engineered out before it ends up getting built. So anyway, there's that. I saw on some of the maps you were showing that mentioned the Mamluks. So the Mamluks were
the Seljuks or the Mamluks? The Seljuks. No?
the Mamluks. But they're the Seljuks, but then there's also the Mamluks. I was just going to explain who they are.
Oh,
the
right.
Mamluks were
Right.
like they're called like the slaves, right? They're like the capture, like the Europeans who were captured by the Muslims and then end up like converting to Islam, and living among them as slaves and that sort of thing. But then somehow get their freedom. I'm not completely read in on the Mamluks, but it's just they do play a role, and they're a little confusing because they're European for the most part. Like they're Greek and European, but they're Muslims. And so they become kind of an actor in a lot of this stuff, where they're attacking. Sometimes they're attacking the Christians, sometimes they're attacking the Muslims. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, the Crusades aside, which was Islam versus Christianity, when that wasn't happening, these people are all fighting like amongst themselves. The Muslims are fighting the Muslims, the Christians are fighting the Christians. You talked about the conflicts happening in like modern day France between all those tribes. In modern day Germany, you have the different caliphates, like the different empires in the Middle East that are fighting one another. The Fatimid, the Ayyubid, the Abbasid, the Seljuks. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then in the film, they kind of make a little bit of a reference to that. Saladin is talking to his second in command, this guy, Ahmad al-Din, who's a real person. And it talks about how he actually criticized Saladin in multiple occasions because he said that Saladin was too generous and too benevolent towards the Christians, like allowing the Christians to live after they would be defeated in battle, allowing them to leave Jerusalem like unharmed. There was like a big thing after the Battle of Acre where a bunch of gold was spent by Saladin in order to basically avoid killing more people. And Ahmad said that was a mistake. They should have just butchered them all. So you have like those kind of moments where it's like, it's like you have these moments of mercy and these moments of benevolence by the Muslims that is completely disregarded. Like that stuff is just never even discussed when you have modern day scholars who talk about this stuff. One of the scholars, by the way, is a guy named Raymond Ibrahim, who has appeared on C-Band Show many times. And I used to have a higher opinion of him until I did that dig on the Western Goals Foundation, because I found out the Western Goals Foundation is tied to the Christian Broadcast Network. And as I was digging into the Christian Broadcast Network, I came across Victor Davis Hanson and Raymond Ibrahim. And Raymond wrote his book, Schmider and Sword, which basically is like hero worship for the Crusaders and the Templars and all that. And he also studied, when he got his PhD, like it says on his Wikipedia, he studied under Victor Davis Hanson. Victor Davis Hanson wrote the like intro to his books. And he also, like, both of them write articles for the Christian Broadcast Network, which is a website, like a news website. And all their articles, like this guy's articles for years have been, fomenting, like screaming for war with Iran, and just being like 2 years ago, being like, prepare for war with Iran. We are doing war with Iran. And there's an archive of these articles. You can go find them. He was saying right after the October 7th attack, it's time to go to, like, enough's enough. It's time to go to war with Iran. Like, these people are all warmongers. You just have to understand, by the way, Victor Davis Hanson, because like Trump will, promote his stuff a lot. The one thing that guy won't talk about for the Badlands audience, he never talks about election integrity ever. So just remember that. He talks about all the other stuff, 6 months to 12 months after he really should have started talking about it. Like he's only now starting to talk about COVID and all that. But like in the correct framing, he never talks about election integrity. So I just, whenever people are like that, I just don't trust them. I think they either are operating from a nefarious standpoint, or they're just very, very, very low information and ignorant. And I tend to think that Victor Davis Hanson is operating in the former. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Anyway, Saracen, just to kind of clean things up, Saracen is just a general term for Muslims that the Europeans developed. So it doesn't designate like Arabs versus Turks versus the Kurds or Persians. It just, if you're a dark-skinned Muslim, you are a Saracen. And then that term was replaced by Mohammedan, and then ultimately Muslim. So like when you see the term Saracen, they're just referring to Muslims in general.
Hey man, where does the term Moor come from? I actually don't know.
The term what?
Moor, like the Moors are invading.
Yeah, so I believe it comes from this area right here, like Morocco. Like I think
Okay.
Morocco comes from the term Moor. So it was really like these people living in like the most western part of North Africa. They were really the ones who like were mobilized against Spain, and there's a long history that goes back even before Islam of conflict between the people living on this side of Gibraltar and people living on this side of Gibraltar. It's also important to understand that if anyone is familiar with the work by Robert Sepper, who's an anthropologist, Europeans, like people of European descent, colonized this entire coastline thousands and thousands of years ago. And so there's a mixture of ethnicities going back, 5,000, 6,000 years in this entire region from the Middle East all the way across North Africa. So it's like in the modern framing, especially like in the post 9/11 rhetoric of the neocon establishment, they try to present it as like brown versus white, like that kind of stuff. But it's just far more nuanced than that. It's just like South America. If you go to South America, there are white people all over South America who identify as Hispanic. The term Hispanic is just merely a reference to Hispaniola, which is the medieval term for this peninsula right here. Hispaniola was Portugal and Spain. And so anyone who was a vassal of Portugal and Spain, which would be all of South and Central America, would be called Hispanic because they were a vassal of this region. So it has nothing to do with ethnicity. It's just, are you a vassal of this king? Then you're Hispanic. So it's kind of a silly term to continue using, but I guess people are going to use what they're familiar with. And then beyond that, I think the last one, I'll just keep things a little. I wanted to share this because I think this is actually a little relevant. I did this. I sent you these images the other day, but I think this is kind of interesting.
Oh yeah,
this ties into this a little bit. This isn't directly related to the Crusades, but I did this research and I shared it the other day. So the Earl of Cromer, Evelyn Baring, he served as the British controller of Egypt from starting in 1879, and it was part of the international control which oversaw Egyptian finances after the Egyptian bankruptcy of 1876. He is credited as the guy who basically brought Egypt into the British Empire at the end of the 1800s. If you look at his history, he descends from a German-English family. So it's a German-British family, the Baring family. They founded what was called Baring Bank. It's considered one of the oldest merchant banks in London. It was founded in 1762 by this guy's like great-grandfather or whatever. It collapsed in 1995 because of like huge fraudulent investments, primarily in futures contracts, derivatives, like that kind of stuff. And it was bought by IGN for £1, which is amazing. But if you look into this guy's history, this audience is going to really appreciate what I'm about to share here about him. This is all going to sound very familiar. So he goes into the military. He's selected to attend the Army Staff College in 1868. He graduates. He then goes to work for the War Office in 1869. In 1871, he's promoted to second captain. 1872, he goes to India to become the private secretary for his cousin, who's the Viceroy of India. And that's where he discovers he has a knack for administration. Remember, 1873 is when two major things happen. That's when Parliament dissolves the East India Company, like officially through like an act of Parliament. Also, the War Office creates the intelligence agency that would become known as British intelligence later. And so I think this guy was working with British intelligence. He was part of the Royal Artillery. So the Royal Engineers are who created British intelligence, but Royal Artillery had a really important relationship with the Royal Engineers. He then goes. So then remember, in the 1860s, the Suez Canal was built between, it's like a joint partnership between British and Egyptians. The Egyptians they're selling cotton. Cotton's like their primary cash crop. So they're borrowing a bunch of money to build the Suez Canal with the British. There's shares, there's like a company that's created and shares are sold, and that's how like the ownership is divvied up. Then the American Civil War happens, and the American Civil War, the South is responsible for a lot of like the cotton sales to Europe. During the Civil War, that dropped off dramatically, especially towards the end of the Civil War. And so that allowed Egypt to just flourish with their cotton sales because they got to take over the market. After the Civil War ends, the South is brought back online as far as like a supplier of cotton, floods the market, like the British flood the market with really cheap cotton, and it just completely destroys the Egyptian economy. And that's what drives the Egyptian bankruptcy of the 1870s. And then Britain is like, these British partners are able to then buy up all the shares, and now on paper they own the Suez Canal. So after this guy becomes the controller general of Egypt, because he's brought in to basically manage this bankrupt nation, that's what then leads to the British invasion of Egypt. There's a war between the two, and they go from just owning the Suez Canal on paper to actually controlling it with their military under his control. It's just fascinating that you can find these connections. The connection between Germany and Britain is there, between the London bankers creating the Suez Canal. And this idea of an infrastructure project, which you and I talk about a lot. I wrote an article for the Brief this morning, which how Putin and Iran are talking about these major infrastructure projects they want to focus on, to help cultivate their alliance and their bond. And you've talked about how that infrastructure projects and cooperation on them between nations is a great way for nations to work together and kind of establish commonality and friendship. And then you see that idea kind of inverted and weaponized in like a really nefarious way. And I just thought that was really interesting. And by the way, this guy also, as you probably know, was responsible for financing the schools in Egypt that would go on, like the students from these schools would go on to form the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928.
Of course. Yep. Well, that's the thing too. Like I'm reading up right now on the role of the Theosophists as well, within my line of research, and just how they branched off. All of these like Gnostic cults. They always tend to, because once you have like a mystical initiatory process, it's purely subjective. You've said that you've like overcome the demon on the threshold. You've integrated with your shadow. You've like achieved all of your Rosicrucian orders and degrees, and you're now hearing, you're clairvoyantly seeing what's going on the other side of the world and getting channeled messages from the demons or whatever, right? So it's basically, it opens up the door to a lot of fraud and lies, right? Because anybody could say that, oh, I'm an initiate into the dark arts. Prove me wrong. I drank the blood, whatever. So then you have the authority to go, because it's all about your will to power. It's all about will, right? You are God now. You've become deified. You've gone through apotheosis. So you've integrated with your inner God. Now you're God. So you can now go and create your own order. So that's what they always do, right? So there's all these subgroups coming out of Theosophy that create the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, and create the Ariosophists, and create the Anthroposophists, and create all these subgroups and subgroups and subgroups, and it never ends. But point is, one of the Blavatsky collaborators who I've been surprised to see again and again is Jamal Abdin Al-Afghani. Al-Afghani is coming up in the Blavatsky circle directly, even though he is the founder of this radical philosophy that promotes a hard, like rigid version of Salafist Islam, which has been conducive at incubating and cultivating a lot of radicals over the centuries, overseen by the Anglo-American sort of high commanders or social engineers. But this guy himself is an occultist. He's a hard, like, occultist who's not into any of that. He doesn't believe in religion. He thinks it's all a giant joke. He believes he's like, I'm getting the sense just by reading a little bit of his life and his interaction with these British mystics, that he's like whatever the Templars were interfacing with, because they were also interfacing with Sufi occult orders in the Holy Land, right? So they were already interfacing with something that was already there. Where that it seems to be that's where the idea of Baphomet even emerged from, was an already existent Babylonian sort of witchcraft, secret society that interfaces with a high priesthood, which has the exact same expression in the Christian world in its own way, but they're very convergent. And you got things in India as well, and in China. But that's what, so it's ironic, right? Like the guy who is himself an Eliphas Levi type theosophist, working with the British out of the Cairo office in the 1870s, is creating a sect of Islam that's going to create the most rigid fundies.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And some of those guys were also Freemasons. It's like they're openly Freemasons.
Oh yeah, they're all Freemasons. Yeah,
they're all Freemasons. and like go to their Wikipedia page, and it's like the first thing's like, oh yeah, he was a Freemason. It's like, wait, what? Like he's a Muslim, but he's a Freemason. And it's like, yeah, and they use the Masonic lodges, like the network of Masonic lodges, to spread these new ideas, like these new ideas of Islam, like these more radical interpretations of Islam, and they use Freemasonry to spread it. It's like, what? Like this stuff, the more you look into it, the more it's like a forehead slapping thing where these ideas that you're already familiar with or you've heard about just keep popping up, and it's not a coincidence.
No, it's not a coincidence. No, it's really not. And actually, on that note, there's a quote by Albert Pike, same book I was citing from, right? Morals and Dogma. It's a really useful book. He goes through a lot of this occult history, and he says something important, which I think might lead into a future episode we've been toying with, but we're not there yet. On the Jesuits, where he says here, the quote, and I'm going to quote him: "The Templars were unintelligent and therefore unsuccessful Jesuits. Their watchword was to become wealthy in order to buy the world. They became so, and in 1312 they possessed in Europe alone more than 9,000 seigneuries, like feudal estates. Riches were the shoal on which they were wrecked. They became insolent and unwisely showed their contempt for the religious and social institutions which they aimed to overthrow. Their ambition was fatal to them." So that's interesting on a number of levels. One that's coming from Albert Pike himself, like 33rd degree mass, Scottish Rite revivalist. But number two, I mean, he's making the point that there's a direct continuity from the Templars, who were a more unsophisticated mercenary force of the papacy, designed to both do the work of the papacy, and also the Holy Roman Emperor, which they want to sort of merge them all into one thing, as well as keep the papacy in check. So if there should ever be a normal human being with a bit of morality that attains some political power, you got the Jesuits to do something about it, as we saw with Clement the seventh, who banished the Jesuits in 1773 and then died immediately, or Pope John Paul I, who died after 36 days in 1978. Right. He was about to rein in the Jesuits and actually also do something about the different Freemasonic outfits that were working with the P2 Lodge, the propaganda duo that had become, people were starting to talk about it back in that time, and he was going to do something about it. So you had the Jesuits and their colleagues do something about him first, and that was actually touched on in the Godfather Part 3 film, if people want to get a sense of a Hollywood rendition of a very truthful thing that happened, which is an interesting thing that was done.
Fascinating.
But yeah, and so for me, it's like looking at how the Jesuits were created the same year that the Anglicans were created. That's important. 1534, just as Henry VIII is induced to create a new church with himself at the head of that church at the same year that the Jesuits are being brought online. That's not a coincidence in my mind. And the interfacing of the Franciscans also are a bridge to the Franciscans. St. Francis and Ignatius Loyola have almost an identical life, identical set of experiences. The order is very similar in many ways, but it's also adding to it. The Jesuits have a lot more flexibility than the Franciscans do. And there's sort of grades of initiation where you're always being examined by a general above you, and depending on what you do will result in what you're told you pass on to or don't pass on to. So most Jesuits, just like most Freemasons, are not bad people. They're just like most Franciscans are not bad people, or Dominicans or Benedictines. They're not bad people. but there's a structure that organized in an exoteric and esoteric fashion with testing going on for those who have what it takes or exhibit some talent for sociopathy or that's tied to a little bit of like a mystical hedonism that will then be given other experiences that your average do-gooder is not going to experience. They won't know about what the sacred nuns really do, and most of the sacred nuns won't know what is going on inside their own convents unless you're an initiate. So you got this whole thing going on to groom people out of it. But between the Templars, the Franciscans, Dominicans, so you got the Templars and the Knights of Malta as sort of a right-hand, left-hand path, not kind of rivals, but not really. Then you got the Franciscans and Dominicans, kind of rivals, but not really, co-created always at the same time. And then you got the Malta Jesuits and Anglicans, right-hand, left-hand path. And then you see shit like this, like this, where you've got a Jesuit takeover of the papacy integrating with the head of the Anglican Church and Lynn Forrester de Rothschild and the Council for Inclusive Capitalism with Mark Carney and a bunch of other Jesuits through the city of London. And then you got like King Charles trotting himself out there, not trying to pass himself off like he's Charlemagne, holding a little like golden globe with the, Christ is King thing on it. And his big staff. He's like, he believes, I'm now 100% persuaded that this inbred believes that he is the heir to the throne of Jesus and the babies Jesus had with Mary Magdalene in France that gave rise to the Merovingian bloodlines that then justified. That's like the Sang Royal. That's the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, right? That's the big surprise you get if you go through your initiation practices appropriately and you like rise to the inner secrets. One of those big surprises is, oh yeah, by the way, the Holy Grail isn't a physical thing. The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail is actually the bloodline that the Priory of Sion has been protecting with the Knights of Sepulchre and the Jesuits of this bloodline of Jesus that has like some sacred force to it. And, so you got but that's like one of the sacred myths that the oligarchy has created for themselves to perpetuate their own existence and justify themselves, which then creates a bit of a mess, which people like Alex Jones, idiot, jumps into when he's like, oh, what an interesting idea. One state solution. Maybe, yeah. Idiot.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's something that Hollywood has also like dabbled in as well with the Da Vinci Code. That was like a huge movie, whatever, like 20 years ago. Right. The Da Vinci Code was all about like protecting the bloodline of Jesus. Right. That was like the underlying plot, like the macro plot that you kind of learn towards the end of the movie. And of course, who did it star? Tom Hanks. So anyone who's familiar with this community knows that Tom Hanks, there's some serious questions around that guy. So yeah. Yep. Fascinating.
Yeah. Well, also the Indiana Jones movies too, right? Like, look at the scenarios in what
Raiders
George
Lost
Lucas
Ark.
is bringing. Yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Holy Grail one with Sean Connery, where he's got to find the Holy Grail, and he's like in all cases he's like battling Nazis who are also trying to do it because the Nazis were actually trying to do that stuff because they had a New Templar order in the SS Thule Society that was like trying to find all of these things. It's total predictive programming.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, let's go. We're up against the hour, so let's go ahead and jump into some rant. Let's jump into some rants real quick, and we also got some boosts before we get out of here. First one is Sean Joe, $5. Loving the show. Thank you, Sean Joe. Thank you for the rant.
Thank you.
Roger 5x5, $5. Venice and especially Amalfi were big centers of selling Christian slaves, especially Slavs, to the Muslims. And Amalfi, I think it was the only major industry. Very interesting.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, that's the sleight of hand that they did. So in getting us to all become essentially Hitler sympathizers, because there's been a lot of work to do that. Like we talked about that, to reform or revise our history to make Hitler seem like the good guy because he fought the Jew bankers. That's the narrative, at least. Part of that also is to tie that in with the evil Khazarian mafia, which ignores everything I just said, which actually proves that was actually the linchpin for one of the most beautiful periods of human history that almost saw the oligarchy destroyed. And instead, the Khazars are being given credit for being the cause of all slavery. And it was Amalfi and then Venice that were orchestrating the driving force of slavery, not Khazaria.
There's there's the skin suit analogy again, right?
Yeah,
it's like they and that's also what Colonel Towner Watkins talked about, where with Gladio, where they would dress up like their enemies and then go do bad things and then be like, look, it was them. So yeah, which is why you just have to be careful about like taking in new information and allow it to distill before you really should never solidify anything in stone, because you're always going to keep acquiring more information.
Measure 5 times, cut once.
Yes. I just wanted to since we're back on Amalfi, I just wanted to show these are actually like kind of small lemons compared to what I saw, and these actually still have a spherical look to them. Some of the ones I saw were like so enormous and had like tumors growing out of them and stuff. But yeah, these are the lemons that they grow in Capri. I don't know what they feed their lemon trees, but dude, they're serious. Yes.
Do they taste like lemons, or are they like sweet, or what?
Oh yeah. I mean, the like what I didn't bite into one of them, but I had like whatever. There's like a bunch of lemon stuff that they gave us, and I mean everything's lemon. It's like lemon candy, limoncello, lemon. It's like when life gives you lemons, make limoncello. Apparently, if you're Italian. But yeah, so I just wanted to share that. I think we have one more rant. Another one from Roger 5x5. $5 Carmesia for boy slaves was a big thing in that trade. He says the medieval Islamic form of castration in which the penis was removed, as well as the testicles. Interesting. Did not know that.
All right.
Yeah. Ouch. Ouch is right. Roger 5x5 again. $5. Rome conquered. I'm going to butcher this, but Mauritania as a province, later gave it up. Morocco comes from that. Moor comes from that after Moroccan Muslims conquered Iberia. Okay, interesting. So Mauritania. Okay. Yep. And then so Morocco comes from Mauritania. Thank you, Roger. See, this is what I love about this show and doing this show, is that we have smart audience members and they teach us stuff all the times. Roger 5x5 again, $2. Barings loaned Thomas Jefferson the money for the Louisiana Purchase. Fascinating. Did not know that. See, that's another interesting little tidbit, and you can piece up this like information together, and start to understand things. Real quick, let's do the boosts, and then we will end this because we are at 2 hours right now. Okay. All right, so we Boozer. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
Do we have another show after us?
No, I don't think so. Okay. I'm just trying to keep it like 2 hours or under.
No, it's a good practice. Yeah.
Just so we don't Russell John's Jimmy's. I know he likes shorter shows. All right, so Boozer $11. I believe this is the only show on Badlands that I haven't missed an episode of. I enjoy the foundation you guys give to start from when I'm looking into world events. I do need to ask one thing that I believe would take the show to higher levels, or 2 levels higher. I believe the people are going to need Ghost of Base Patrick Henry to step his game up and start reading things in accents like Matt does. It will be even better, being most of the articles he's reading has a Middle Eastern origin. LOL. But seriously, this is the way things should be taught, discussed in schools and universities. I hope that's the direction we are going. Man, great boost. Really appreciate that. Kind words. Yes, the accents I find very entertaining when Matt reads in accents and when Patrick Gunnels reads in accents. Maybe I will bust those out. I already like kind of butcher like names and words and stuff. So I feel like that's already kind of my shtick. I don't do it on purpose. I just can't pronounce this stuff. I have a fat Irish tongue, so I just can't pronounce it. So that's already kind of my shtick. I don't know if I can afford another shtick that's going to make me even
we all have talents that God gave us.
Yeah, accents probably are not one of mine, but who knows? Maybe one day I'll try them. Eleanor 2000, $25. Matt, Gordon and Matt, this is just a small token of support for the weekly galvanizing history lessons. The two of you are weaving a historical tapestry using threads of time and events of which we've been deprived. Without a doubt, God unrolled a historical scroll before me these past 4 years that has led to amazing writers, sincere academics, and podcasters such as yourself. Each week, breaking history leaves me on the edge of my seat, striving for more. You two are brilliant, gifted, and positioned just for this time by God. For many of us whose lives you are impacting, I am among many deeply grateful. Well, thank you very much for that, Eleanor. I really appreciate that. I know Matt does as well. And I think it's important, like I was saying at the beginning of the episode, I hope what happens as a result of the show and like films like Kingdom of Heaven is it sparks an interest, a curiosity that then drives you to go look into this stuff. And you'll have this existing history. And even if it's a history that comes from Hollywood or something that's a lot more superficial, it gives you a framework to compare the information that you're learning along the way. So then you take the information, you take it back to your original framework, and then you start tinkering and you say, all right, this was obviously BS. This was BS. This was BS. And you start like picking it apart and replacing it with the truth. And that's how you start to kind of like build out your knowledge or your understanding of history. And, you know, like everyone probably does it a different way. That's just like one way of looking at it. But I view that as, you know, you're never going to have a complete and total knowledge, because how could you possibly know everything that's ever happened ever? It's really more about the narratives and understanding the narratives and understanding the significance of events and which events are more significant than others, and how they impact one another. So I feel like that is a good way of looking at it. And Matt was saying last week, you know, zooming out and zooming back in, zooming out and zooming back in. That's a good way of looking at it too, where it's like you have the macro narrative, and then you have the individual specifics, like the specific anecdotes, the specific people, the events, and those two things play together to help you develop that knowledge.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the whole point, right? Is that it's knowledge is a power of transformation. It's not a thing that you just put into your head as if the brain is just some space to fit facts into as objects. It's not that at all. If that's what we're doing, like that's the reason why a lot of us lose passion for the study of history or science or whatever we were broken out of loving in school, because it's treated like it's facts to be memorized without a real active process of understanding. There's not that awakening of that childlike sense of wonder and awe and excitement in the pursuit of a good answer to a hypothesis, right? So when it's done right, you know it takes on a different living character as like a eureka that then you can build upon and you can use to make further discoveries with that as your reference point. So you know what that feeling of a real discovery was. You know the amount of work that your mind did in processing a lot of information, withholding judgment before you chose to make your incision. That's what I think of as a judgment, is an incision after you do a lot of measuring, right? So it requires like testing this hypothesis out, testing this one, having a flexible, open mind, always examining your own assumptions to figure out like what's holding me back from making a discovery, right? So you're always self-examining core assumptions. And then when you get into that motion, you're like, okay, the effect is a real discovery. And now with that, I can use that as my reference point for future experiences of discoveries that I need to make, and not rely upon some expert opinion or some group opinion of people who are maybe in my friend network who I don't want to look stupid around. So I'll adapt to their opinions instead. No, you don't want to do that. You'd rather use your own mind. And so there's these techniques that are just like very natural, very happy things to do. And we should have all had the right to do that when we were kids in school. But unfortunately, we were born into an empire that doesn't encourage, that actually encourages that heavily, to put it lightly. So
that's so true. And once you get to that point where you are like that nuance, where you are like you're going back and altering your understanding or what you thought, like your presumptions, what you were told, that knowledge that you've earned is held in a much higher value in your mind. And it also, me personally, once I've reached that point, that level, I don't feel like the need to go argue with everyone who disagrees with me, because it's like, I know what I know. It may not be the full truth. Like I may have like little things wrong, but to me, it's the truth, or to me, it's my best understanding. And everyone kind of has to take their own path to get there, and they're not all going to arrive at the exact same place. But that process, that journey is for each person to do, and we can help each other along. But we shouldn't be like offended or angry when somebody disagrees with us or sees it a different way, because, like I've said before, all history is interpretation. So, and it's the different interpretations that are going to inform each other on like the nuance and those little tidbits that we're missing Somebody who you completely disagree with on something may give you a little tidbit, like a little piece of information that was the missing puzzle piece to something else that you were looking into. And I found that has happened more often than not. So keep it up in mind. All right. I think there's one or two more. G-Man Canada, $20. Best show on Badlands. My mom got me into Badlands. It's her birthday on April 20th. Could y'all wish her a happy birthday? Her name is Karen. I seem to remember Matt not being a fan of Ludwig von Mises in Austrian economics. I was wondering if he could elaborate on why. I'd love to meet you guys at GART someday. I'll start by saying happy birthday, Karen. That will be this
Happy
Saturday.
birthday, Karen.
Yeah, April 20th. That's G Money's birthday too, by the way. So we'll be celebrating in Dallas. But yes, happy birthday, Karen. And I don't know if you want to address that question about Ludwig von Mises. Is it Mises? Mises?
I would say von Mises. Might be Mises. I'll say Mises. I know we're out of time. So what I'll do is I'll put a little link to an essay that I did in the comments section under this video. But in short, no, I'm not a fan of the Austrian school. I'm a follower of the school of the American system of political economy, of Lincoln and that whole thing. And so in my article, I go into that in a lot of detail, as well as in all of my books. I did 4 volumes of The Clash of the Two Americas, and I illustrate my thinking on that matter very, very deeply, so that people can find that on CanadianPatriot.org, all of my books, and the comments section under this video on Rumble.
Awesome. Well, and then the last one is Eleanor 2000 again, $25. Gordon and Matt, this is just wait. I think we already read that. We did already read that. So that may have been that was the last one. So we're good. Sweet. Well, thank you everyone for watching. That concludes this week's episode of Breaking History. We will be back next week with something hopefully intellectually stimulating, but I'm sure it'll be. Jesuits are coming up. Black nobility, probably need to do black nobility. But yeah, we'll put our heads together and figure that out, because there's a lot. Like, we started talking about Venice today, so I feel like we need to maybe go down the Venice rabbit hole.
Yeah, we can scratch on that. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Awesome.
Till next time, everyone. Thank you all for joining us.